Captain Miranda Voss and her breakaway crew are downloaded into a dead alien derelict infected by an ancient pathogen that converts life into a merged hive mind, and she has to watch as her dear crew members are eaten and altered one by one in a last-ditch effort to prevent the pathogen from killing humanity. She destroys her own ship and parallels it aboard the Nightingale using an electromagnetic weapon, killing the pathogen and herself, as well as everyone else on the Nightingale. She'd been captain of the deep space ship Nightingale for 7 years and hadn't lost a crew member. Her ship's perfect safety rating was a point of pride, which hung in her room along with letters of commendation from the Galactic Maritime Authority. But pride, she would learn, was a luxury the universe would not afford her any time. The emergency signal was transmitted from the outer edges of the Kepler sector, the place where most ships Honoyu could nay Sunark fear to tread. The message was distorted, urgent, of a lost ship adrift in the void. Protocol demanded they investigate. Miranda picked out her crew of 12, the best spacers she had ever flown with. Chief Engineer Tobias Chen. His steady hands had kept the Nightingale together through 3 wars. Navigator Jade Hoffman, who could chart a course through an asteroid. Field while blindfolded. The ex-Marines, one of whom actually was an ex-Marine security chief, Marcus Kane, and his absolute loyalty, Dr. Amelia Rodriguez. The ship's surgeon, a compassionate woman with a surgeon's precision. They were all hand-picked, all trusted. The abandoned ship show up on their sensors like an open sore in space. It wasn't anything available in their databases. The hull was a mad jumble of organic curves and metal, angles that appeared to change when looked at head-on. It was almost 2 kilometers long, paling in comparison to Nightingale. Dark energy signatures began issuing from its core, readings that caused their instruments to howl warnings. Sir Jade's voice was tight from the navigation dome. I'm getting life forms on board that ship. Hundreds of them, but they're wrong somehow. The readings are all over the place, as if the life signs are overlapping one another. Miranda pored over the readings herself, her experienced eye going through the data. Surviving 23 years in space had taught her to trust her instincts, and every instinct was screaming danger. But the Maritime Code provided clear guidance for rescue. They had no alternative but to investigate. The team, including Marcus, Dr. Rodriguez, and 2 lower-ranking officers, Petty Officer Lisa Chang and Technician David Park, regroups on the shore. They put on full environmental gear and charged their weapons. Miranda griped over the comms as their shuttle entered the Derelict's docking bay, wide mouth that threatened to devour their little ship. The first broadcast arrived 30 minutes after they had docked. Marcus's voice was garbled by the alien, energy that came from the vessel as he spoke over the comm system. Captain, we've entered the ship. The architecture is unsettling. The corridors appear to pulse like they are alive. We're picking up loads of life forms, but they're not returning our hails. Miranda clenched the wide handles of her command chair. Proceed with caution, Chief. If anything seems off, get out of there. An hour later, a second transmission arrived. This time the appeal came from Dr. Rodriguez. Her normally reserved tone stretched thin. Captain, we've found them. The crew of this vessel, they're no longer fully human. Or maybe they never were. They seem to be in some form of hibernation, but their bodies have changed. There are growths, extensions, things that are not produced by any known species. Miranda's blood ran cold. Explain, altered, Doctor. It's as if something has been changing their genetic code from within. I'm finding remnants of an unknown pathogen, but it's not operating like any virus or bacterium I'm familiar with. It's almost as if it is smart, deliberate in the changes. The third transmission never came. Miranda also had to wait 2 hours before launching a second boarding party. This time, she would captain it herself. Tobias started, but Miranda was sure the ship would have something to say about that. Too long crewed to let its captain fly off into danger. She brought along Navigator Hoffman, Communications Officer Brett Sullivan and Marine, Sergeant Maya Patel. The interior of the alien construct was an unholy conflation of technology and biology. Walls that ought to have been metal pulsed with organic matter. Lights that ought to have been electric burned with an inner flame that appeared to observe their comings and goings. The air buzzed with a current that they could feel on their skin, and which caused their instruments to malfunction. The first body they found in an impossibly long corridor that stretched in either direction. He was David Parkour, who was left. Of him, his body was altered, infected just like the pathogen that had changed the crew of the alien ship. Black veins webbed up and across his skin like a lattice of poison rivers, and instead of eyes, only orbs of utter shadow remained. The pits held sockets that looked at their position even in death. Jesus fucking Christ, Brett muttered into the cum. What happened to him? Miranda crouched down next to the body, her tricorder returning readings she couldn't explain. His cells were overwritten in full. Whatever did this didn't merely kill him, it made something else of him entirely. They located Lisa Chang in the medical bay of the ship, encased in a cocoon of organic webbing which throbbed to its own heartbeat. She was alive, but was hardly a human being. Her mind wavered between recognition and something infinitely more alien. When she spoke, there were overtones to her voice that should not exist in a pair of human vocal cords. "Captain," she whispered, "it's beautiful, the joining, the becoming. You will have no conception of the perfect unity, the identity of mind and of purpose there is. They're not invaders, they're liberators. They don't liberate us by unlocking a cell of solitary selfhood. Not." Without the courage to pull that trigger, Miranda did raise her weapon, but she faltered. It was her crew member, someone she had served with for 3 years, whose birthday she'd celebrated just a month ago. "Lisa, fight this. You are stronger than whatever is in you." That is a smile, turned into something else by Lisa's altered features. "I am stronger, Captain. Stronger than I ever imagined. And soon, you will be too." The veins around Lisa started pulsing more and more, and Miranda's blood ran cold as she saw with increasing horror that it was growing out, reaching toward them like hands about to grab. She had fired, the streams of plasma burning into the flesh and mercifully killing Lisa. But the damage was done. The pathogen had been removed into the ship's atmosphere. They stumbled upon Dr. Rodriguez in the ship's laboratory, her body partially transformed, but with her mind still her own. She furiously worked at a console, trying to fathom the pathogen devouring her from the inside. "Cap'n," she gasped, voice twisting with exertion and pain. "I've been analyzing the infection. It is not just a disease, but a consciousness, one that I've been studying for almost 20 years. A collective intelligence that propagates by editing the genetic code of its hosts. It doesn't just seize the body, it assimilates the mind, the memories, the very soul of what makes us us." Miranda picked her up discreetly, seeing a thick, thready lilac trail crawling up her arms. "How long do you have?" "Hours, maybe less. But I've discovered something important. The pathogen has a weakness. It is susceptible to certain electromagnetic frequencies, particular combinations that would shatter its cellular unity. I've been trying to come up with a way to weaponize it, but I need more time. Time is something we D&T have, Miranda replied as she watched more of her crew transform. Brett began jerking, his eyes rolling back in their sockets as the infection set in. Maya was struggling. Shit. Her military training had been keeping her focused, but Dee could already see the dark tessellations blooming around her neck. Dr. Rodriguez saved her research onto a portable drive, her hands shaking with the speed of the transition. Take this back to the ship. Put it on the big computer. If you can enhance the electromagnetic field generators, you might be able to produce a frequency that is lethal to the pathogen. What about you? I'm already gone, Captain. The virus is in my brainstem. In a few minutes, it won't really be me anymore. I'll be one of them. She thrust the drive into Miranda's palm. Promise me you'll stop this. Don't allow it to spread to other worlds. Miranda assumed control of the drive, heartbroken as she listened to her friend and colleague slowly succumb to the alien mind. I promise. The retreat to the Nightingale was a running fight. The alien's crew was breeding. Those infected were beginning to stir when their mutated forms shot into action with otherworldly speed and grace. They assaulted not with weapons, but with their bare hands, hoping to transmit the infection. Through direct contact, Miranda and those left of her crew had to battle their way through corridors that appeared to move and warp as though the ship intended to imprison them. Brett was the first to fall, torn by a mob of infected aliens who looked like they had never been humans at all. They were stopped by Maya as Miranda made it to the shuttle, but the infection was already in control of her. With her last glimpse of sanity, she engaged the shuttle's emergency thrusters, shoving them off from the jerry-rigged vessel. Let my family know I as a human, she whispered before being overcome by the transformation. Miranda had to kill her while on their flight back to the Nightingale, gazing in horror as her friend's eyes went black and her body started to change. The electromagnetic frequency that Dr. Rodriguez had discovered was effective at killing the pathogen, though not until after it had taken another life. On the Nightingale, Miranda discovered that 3 formed members of her crew had similarly begun to exhibit symptoms of infection. The pathogen had somehow leapt through the ship's communications, carried on the signals generated by her own boarding party. Engineer Tobias's people were fighting the infection with every medical countermeasure at their disposal, but the pathogen was morphing, evolving, growing stronger with each new host it infected. Captain, Tobias said, and his voice was raw with fatigue and the first symptoms of infection. I've analyzed Dr. Rodriguez's research. The frequency generator can be adjusted to impact the entire ship, but it needs a huge power spike to do so. We would have to send all power through the core engines and cross the circuit. What are you saying? I'm telling you we'd need to kill the ship to kill the infection. The electromagnetic pulse would sterilize the pathogen, as it would every system on the Nightingale. We'd be dead in space. Miranda glanced around the bridge at her survivors. It was all Hoffman could do to keep from losing control of her body as the infection pounced on her nervous system. Jensen had already started to develop the characteristic dark veins of the advanced stage of infection. She and Tobias were the only ones who had remained fully human, and she could see the grip of the virus tightening in his eyes more and more by the second. How long till the engine room infector gets there encrypted? She asked. Maybe an hour. It can only spread to other ships if it takes over the systems of this one as first arbiter of where we dock, and if it makes its way to a populated planet, ... Tobias didn't have to complete the sentence. They both understood the implications. Miranda has to swallow the toughest decision of her command career. She triggered the ship's distress signal, sending an alert to all ships in the region. The Nightingale was to become a biohazard quarantine area, infected with an undisclosed pathogen capable of knocking out the entire human system. No boat must of any sort come near it for any cause. Then she set out to turn her ship into a weapon. The calibrating of the electromagnetic frequency generator had to be done with absolute accuracy, while most of her crew were dead or changed out of recognition, leaving Miranda to operate alone. She began shunting power from the life support, weapons systems, and the navigation, all into the main engines. Huge amounts of power charged through the reactor core, and the hull of the ship began to shake. Her converted crew members, now one by one, came for her. Navigator Hoffman flowed with inhuman quickness, the taint in her mind no longer acknowledging Miranda was her captain. Jensen had turned into something quite inhuman and grotesque, his form exaggerated out of proportion by the pathogen's influence. Each time Miranda would hit the switch on the portable EMG, Dr. Rodriguez's own invention, and aloofly observe the frequency lay waste to the pathogen and what was left of her friends. Tobias held out the longest, his engineer's discipline and knowledge of the systems of the ship allowing him to battle the infection. But he, too, finally gave in, his last words a desperate, pleading hope that Miranda would finish the mission. "Don't let it get away," he murmured as the darkness overtook his eyes. "Promise me you won't let that get to Earth," with tears running from her face. Miranda killed him, using the electromagnetic pulse to stop his pain and keep the pathogen from infecting another one. She was all alone now, the sole human awareness remaining alive within a vessel that was nothing but a mausoleum of infected bodies. An explosion of power was becoming close to critical mass. The hull of the ship was starting to cave in on itself, and Miranda knew she only had minutes before the whole thing split in two. She headed to the bridge and assumed the captain's seat one last time. The alien wreck was still on the main screen, its angular hull throbbing with malign power. Miranda had identified other infected vessels in the vicinity, all attracted by some sort of psychic beacon that the pathogen employed as it spread from one host to another. They were all there, everyone that waited for her to slip up so the infection could get out. She would not give them such an opportunity. Miranda pushed the electromagnetic pulse, which fused the entire output of the ship's reactor into the modified frequency generator. The result was swift and catastrophic. The virus that it had been, that had infiltrated her crew, her ship, and the enemy ships, began to succumb. Its cell decayed by the narrowly tuned electromagnetic waves. The infected bodies on board the ship melted away, the mutated flesh reverting back into its original form now the virus's grip was gone. The derelict alien spasmed as the infection that had given it life for who knows how long was finally eradicated. One after another, the tainted ships in the area went black, their crews released at long last from the horror that had devoured them. But the electromagnetic pulse hadn't just killed the pathogen. It had fried every one of the Nightingale's systems, leaving Miranda all alone in space with no power and no life support and no communication with which to call for help. The ship was dying by portions around her. Its structure continued to warp as the great energy release had already weakened the materials of the hull. Miranda transmitted a last message and uploaded it to the emergency beacon of the ship, hoping that someday it would be found and transferred to others. And she described the pathogen's abilities, the electromagnetic frequency that could destroy it, and the warning to humanity that had to be shared. The universe was huge, and aliens were not the only threat. There were things out there that undermined human life, but human identity itself. As the last of the ship's life support systems went dark, Miranda sighed with an odd sort of resignation. She had upheld her promise to Dr. Rodriguez and had contained the pathogen from spreading to other realms. Her crew was dead, her ship was dying, but humanity would not. It was worth the sacrifice. For 3 months, the Nightingale floated in space before a recovery team discovered it. The ship was a mausoleum, its passageways lined with rows and rows of the perfectly preserved corpses of Miranda's crew. The pathogen had been all but obliterated by the electromagnetic pulse, and there was no longer any sign of infection, only of what had occurred. Miranda's last message was beamed back to Earth and classified at the highest levels of government. On board, the official report stated there was no loss of life, and the Nightingale had been such a great loss to a navigational error, their brave crew having died serving humanity. But those who knew better knew they had died as something much more important. They'd died as sentinels, guarding a universe that wouldn't ever realize how close it had teetered on the edge of being consumed by an alien intelligence that saw humankind not as an enemy to be extinguished, but rather as a treasure to be plundered and assimilated. The pathogen had been ancient, older than humanity itself, and it had all but eradicated countless species throughout the galaxy. But it had never met anything so purely as bloody-minded as human bullheadedness, human fidelity, human willingness to make a total and complete mess of everything for the sake of grand ideals. The electromagnetic frequency revealed by Dr. Rodriguez is used to construct a class of weapons to defend humankind from such threats. Vessels had defense mechanisms in place to identify and digest unfriendly organisms before they proliferated. The outer rim space was patrolled by specially designed ships, which were tasked with hunting down and destroying infected vessels. Yet Miranda Voss was not hailed as a hero, but as a butter captain who had lost her whole crew to some unseen menace. The real account of what took place aboard the Nightingale is a secret to which only a very few are privileged, those who know the full cost of savior in the dark. Many years in the future, when other ships would face the same threats, they would be able to meet the danger head-on and better prepared because of the sacrifice of Miranda and her crew. Those EMP frequency blasters were effective against many alien diseases. Throughout the galaxy, they save countless lives. But the price of that knowledge was never lost on those who had seen the classified records, and finally, Miranda Voss would have done something that no other ship captain in the annals of space travel had done. She had weaponized her ship to save human civilization from an existential threat. The Nightingale was a charnel house. However, it was a charnel house, which babies the living. The ship sailed on, human derelict with empty hull. The pathogen that had sustained it for thousands of years had disappeared, wiped out by an electromagnetic pulse that had killed Miranda. But the ship was there, a memorial to the cost of survival and the bravery of the people who choose to pay it. Once in a while, deep in the space lanes where the Nightingale had stood and fought its last battle, ships would make eclectic records. On their sensors, almost familiar energies which the EMP, that very pulse which had saved the human race, had somehow engraved upon the very fabric of the space-time continuum itself. Pilots would tell of surveillance felt, observed by a something that was no longer there, but its presence could still be felt. The fact was, Miranda Voss hadn't merely annihilated an alien scourge. She'd forged a protector, a being that would guard over this region of space and make sure that such a threat would never be able to re-emerge. The frequency had been incorporated into the background cosmic radiation in that region of space, a defensive shield of pure radiation that would incinerate any pathogenic organism that formed. But Miranda herself had vanished, a shattered consciousness flung out through the stars at the instant of the electromagnetic pulse. She had sacrificed more than her life. She had sacrificed her own existence to protect mankind from a menace that very few of them would ever be aware of. It was an ultimate all-in, a total, a selfless, complete. The Nightingale's crew had been taken to the very limits of their humanity and passed that test, while the pathogen had attempted to strip away their individuality for its own acquisition. They had kept themselves whole enough to aid their captain to succeed in her mission. Dr. Rodriguez had waged a battle against the infection until he was able to develop the weapon that would vanquish it. Tobias also had kept the vital systems of the ship going a sufficient time for Miranda to fashionable solution. Even Maya and Brett had stolen precious minutes with their last acts of defiance. Eventually, the Nightingale was more than a graveyard. It had come to stand as an image of human resistance, human defiance, human unwillingness to bow to other masters, no matter how powerful or how ancient. The ship floated inert in space, a testament to the cost of freedom and the bravery it took. To pay that price, the pathogen was conquered, but the universe was a big place, full of similar hazards. Humanity would come up against them again, and when they did, they would meet them in at least some of the ways that Miranda Voss and her crew had died for them to learn about. The frequency microwave arms would be charged, the shields would be on, and what was learned from the Nightingale would pave the way for space travel for generations to come. But it was not the weapons, nor the defensive systems. That became the defining legacy of Captain Miranda Voss. It was this recognition that the strongest force in humanity was not its weapons or technology, but the universal willingness to sacrifice everything for the safety of others. The employees of the Nightingale had been confronted by a danger that could have devoured all of human civilization, and they had decided to die as humans rather than survive as something else. It was in that decision, in that ultimate act of defiance against a monstrous intellect that ultimately wished to see the very concept of man erased from existence, that the human race truly became dangerous to the dark forces that lurked in the darkest recesses of the universe. The pathogen had thought it would be able to absorb another species, another multitude of minds to add to hive brain. It had found not what it was looking for, but something it had never met before. Creatures who preferred death to the final loss of their own. Unique personality that had destroyed the pathogen had been driven as much by the combined will of every Homo sapiens on board the Nightingale as by the nuclear furnace in the engine room. Their stubborn refusal to lay down and die, a fierce and furious desire to ensure that their kind survived, had poured into the weapon, turning it into a force that was more than just a weapon. And in the end, that was the game changer. The pathogen was old and strong, and it had consumed numerous species throughout the galaxy, but it had never met human stubbornness, human loyalty, human affection for their own kind. Those qualities had been formed in the crucible of Earth's history, shaped by millions of years of evolution and hardship. That the crew of the Nightingale had taken those characteristics with them, and when put to the trial, had shown that man was indeed ready to join the ranks of the stars, not as conquerors or explorers, but as keepers, protectors of the values that allowed life to have meaning. The ship drifted, a monument to sacrifice, heroism. The corpses of Miranda's crew were inside, perfectly preserved, their faces at rest. In death, they had died like they had lived. Humans and their sacrifices were the only thing that stood between humanity and a future where they didn't live as people. The universe was a big, bad place, and yet it was also one of hope. And that hope was not in man's tools or his weapons, but in the simple knowledge that out there were creatures who would rather die on their feet than live on their knees. They'd fought and died and endured. The crew of the Nightingale had proven that, and they'd be remembered so long as man dared to reach the stars.